Well, I've been around for a long time. I was born in 1923 in Oklahoma, so that makes me 95 plus and going strong. Uh, I grew up in Oklahoma. This guy, Tom Brokaw, the journalist, wrote a book about the greatest generation. We didn't know anything about that. We didn't claim any fame to that. The same thing is true with the Air Force that I flew in the 8th Air Force. Someone gave the name Mighty 8th, so those are two names that have just been stuck with my existence. But I was born in Oklahoma, 1923, and I'm very much familiar with the Depression and also the Dust Bowl. Now, a lot of people hear about it, but they don't really know about it, haven't experienced it. So now during this period of time, there was no income, none whatsoever. Whatever came from the cattle or whatever came from the field, irrigated by the homemade well, that was it. And when there was no longer grass for the cattle to eat and water for them to drink, they had to leave. So they gave all that up and came back to Oklahoma. That's where I came into the world, and I discovered America in Blackwell, Oklahoma in 1923. But people say, well, how in the world did you get interested in flying? Now, the navigation system for airlines back then were the railroads. If you wanted to get from point A to point B, you'd find two towns and follow the railroad to it, and that's how you got around. That's your navigational aids. And so Aunt Sue was so excited because the Wassom homestead was right between Wichita, Kansas, and Guthrie, Oklahoma, which was the first capital of Oklahoma. And the railroad ran across their property. Well, Aunt Sue was out one day, and she heard this whirring in the air and looked up, and lo and behold, here's an airplane flying by. Oh, she said, oh, that guy, he flew so close. I waved at him, and he was flying wire bailing, that kind of an aircraft. Said he flew so low, he looked at me and waved, and he was so low that I could even see the wings flapping, which they probably were on this airplane. But it was a pretty primitive type of airplane, and so that was my first exposure. And then this big city of Blackwell, just up the way there, had an airport, which was a cow pasture with no trees and nothing else. But anyway, somehow it attracted the attention of people, and so they started having air shows. And the air shows brought people in, and also they flew right by our farm. Then they introduced the Ford Trimotor, and I was in on that. And the Ford Trimotor was a 3-engine, all-metal aircraft, which was unusual because most of them were made out of sticks and stones. And two daring guys were there to fly it for us. And it was made out of corrugated metal, 3 engines, and it would hold 12 people. So that was the big airline of the day. Believe it or not, years later, one came to Bowling Green just 3 or 4 years ago, a Ford Trimotor made in 1927, and I was born in 1923, so figure it out. But anyway, that plane was here, kind of old, but I went for a ride, and I even got to fly it. I got hands-on flying of a Ford Trimotor that old, and me this old, and so it was quite an experience. But anyway, that's how I got interested in aviation. World War II was on the horizon, where Pearl Harbor was bombed and Hitler joined in. But it was during this period of time that they started having Civil Air Patrol flights in the great big airplanes, the Piper J3 Cub, which was a little 2-place thing made out of sticks and stones. A very primitive airplane, but nonetheless, the Civil Air Patrol began patrolling the prairies. Why, I don't know what they did, but the guys learned to fly. But I was too old. I was still in high school. And the war happened. I graduated from high school in 1941 in September. I guess it was later, September, thereabouts. And they started what was called the Aviation Cadet program. And that program was designed to find people to fly the airplanes in the Air Force. At that time, the United States Army Air Corps was in its infancy. And when war happened, they knew they needed airplanes because Hitler was using airplanes. Stuka bombers were bombing the cities and the villages of Spain. And that's where Hitler's pilots got their training. Well, we got our training a couple of years later. But anyway, they said we need pilots. And so they created a program called Aviation Cadet Program. And you could sign up and get to going as a pilot. Requirements: good physical condition, no color blindness, 20/20 vision, do good exercises, this kind of thing. 4 years of college. Well, here I am, high school, so I've got 4 years to wait. I had a buddy when I was in 3rd grade, name of Robert Markley. Robert Markley was my buddy. Their farm was miles south of ours from Oklahoma, Blackville, Oklahoma. And so Robert Markley was in college, got his degree. He went off and became a pilot, Army Air Corps pilot, flew P-40s. He was my idol, by the way. I said, I'm going to do what Robert Markley did. Robert Markley was in Hawaii, December 7, 1941. The Japanese attacked on December 7, 1941. And Robert Markley was the first Oklahoman killed in World War II. In Newkirk, there is a memorial there for him. So my idol was gone, but my dream was not. And so I waited and waited and waited, and so they lowered the requirements to 2 years of college. Well, that helped some, but I'm still a long ways off. They kept recruiting and getting it. They said, we need 50,000 pilots. Well, there weren't 50,000 young people that met all the requirements. So they lowered the requirements again to no college. And there were a bunch of us because I was in college working on an aeronautical degree of all things. But anyway, that's where we were. And when Pearl Harbor happened, they accelerated the programming to get us all in it. At about the same time, the British were fighting it alone in England. They were being attacked, the Blitz of 1940 and 41. London was being devastated. They were trying to train their pilots, and they said, would America let us train our pilots in America? And the agreement was, yes, we will. We will provide the planes, the instructors, the facilities, the encouragement, whatever's needed to get. So, of all places, my hometown, Ponca City, was selected to be one of those bases. And it was called BFS, British Foreign Flight School, number 8. And that was in Oklahoma. We had number 8. There was another one in the next town over, a little ways, 100 miles away, in Missouri. So when BFS 8 came to town, we had a pretty decent airport. Not adequate, but they enlarged the airport, built hangars, built barracks, also, and the first contingent arrived. The first thing to happen was they flew in PT-17s, which were biplanes that were designed to learn to fly. That was what the standard plane in the Air Force at that time. Then BT-13s came in. Then AT-6s came in. All those are basic and advanced training. The same type of training that they were giving the Americans. So here we were. We had all these Brits, all these limey guys, and everybody took them in their home and loved them. But the base was there, and I got a job out there, washing airplanes. But that's what I did. And that was my first contact, first time I learned to taxi an airplane, which was in the AT-6 Texan, a single-engine retractable landing gear, so on and so on. Well, I worked there until I got my call. I enlisted. I knew I had enlisted. I enlisted in the cadet program, which was, as I explained, the requirements. I enlisted in August of 1942. When we were in basic flight, the second phase of different kind of an airplane, we could take a choice of going to multi-engine or single engine. And so I chose multi because I wanted to fly the big ones and so on. They said, okay, what kind of multi-engine? And the B-24s were just out. They were just out, but they were a bigger plane than the Flying Fortress, which was the state of the art at that time. But when the B-24 came along, it just outstripped them in so many ways. So I said, I want to go to Liberator School. So I graduated. They assigned me to multi-engine school, but I had a week's leave before I go, so I went home. And at that time, I had an interesting occasion. One of my buddies, George Waddell, was a pilot buddy of mine from Tulsa. I was from Ponca City, 100 miles apart. He said, Wassom, I'm getting married. Would you be my best man? I've never been in a wedding. I don't know anything about weddings. Well, you just stand there. Well, okay, I'll come and stand. So I accepted the challenge. So I showed up. And George showed up, and all the rest of them showed up, and the preacher showed up, and they had a rehearsal, and they said, went through all the rigmarole a couple of times so we wouldn't get lost, and I tried to remember that I was supposed to stand on that X and move to that X, and, you know, how to do it, how these wedding planners do it. Well, this is all new to me. I didn't know anything about it. Plus, I had not been a woman, you know, not run after the women. I was dating and all that kind of stuff. I was zero. I knew about as much about weddings as I did about God. So, the next night, the wedding. Well, of course, the bride and groom went their way, and here I am, stuck with this preacher's daughter. I guess that's what they said. Here, you take her to reception. So we did. We went to the reception, and I took her home. That was it. I didn't have an address because of a new assignment. I had a new place to go. And so we exchanged addresses, but I said, you write to me at home, so she wrote to me at home. Pink stationery with green ink. That's her hallmark. Have some of the letters still around that we wrote. But anyway, that was that. I went off to Liberal, Kansas to learn to fly B-24s, which I wanted. And that took 4 or 5 months, but she's in Tulsa and I'm out in the panhandle of Oklahoma. Finished my B-24 training, went to what they call the phase school where I picked up my crew. So I'm an aircraft commander now, and I get my crew of 9 other guys. I picked them up in Lincoln, Nebraska. And from Lincoln we went to Casper, Wyoming, where we did our training together. I was still learning to fly the B-24, but I'm the command pilot, so I know all about it. And the rest of them don't know anything, so it leaves me a little bit ahead of them. But anyway, when we finished our training, we were pronounced combat ready. That was just a proclamation. It wasn't true, but it was, that's what we got signed. Combat ready. Anyway, we were in Topeka. They said, here are your orders. We were assigned an airplane, honest to goodness airplane. It was ours. It was brand new, still smelled new. And we did some test flights in it before we left. And they said, here are your orders. Take off and head east. After 1 hour, you can open your orders. So we flew east and opened our orders, and it said, where to go? New England, Iceland, Greenland, Wales. That was our route. We were going to the 8th Air Force. When we went, they were having raids with, for instance, Black Thursday, when they lost 60-some aircraft to fighter. And that kind of slowed us down a little bit. But that force eventually grew, and while I was there, to include 41 bases. A base was made up of about 3,500 people. We flew those missions out of England, 35 of them. They didn't like us to get acquainted with the guys in the next barracks because you come home and they're not there. So that's the way it worked. We didn't get really very well acquainted with anybody except the fellows in our barracks, the ones with whom we flew. But anyway, we were ferried to our base. As we landed, here's a big spread of meat wagons. We called the ambulances meat wagons. People around the control tower, and we thought, boy, what a welcoming committee. Well, they weren't looking for us. They were looking for the guys that were coming back from that mission that day. We landed, they could care less. They were watching the planes come in one by one. Who's there, who isn't, who's having a smoke boil out or their wings shot off or whatever, watching to see how many. 3 did not show up that day. And we went to the barracks. There was despondency all over the base. We lost at least 30 guys and maybe more wounded. They lost 3 aircraft that day. The next day, our brand new commander, was a Major Lombrick, called the new crews in. He said, what happened yesterday is unfortunate. That's the price of war. We came here to win the war and to live. So it's up to you to live. It's up to you. The choice is yours. You can work hard, be careful and fight hard, or you can be careless and be missing. So that was our first day. A few days later, they had never made a mission to Berlin before. Guess where our first mission was? Mission number 1, Berlin. It was interesting. 9 months later, our final mission, number 35, flown to Berlin. So my first and last was at Berlin. And one of the very optimistic guys, when we gathered at the plane to leave, somebody came and said, well, Wassom, this will be your last mission one way or another. Real good encouragement, from those guys. But that was it. And 28,000 8th Air Force airmen perished. 28,000. And then another roughly 28,000 were taken prisoners of war. So that's a big chunk of people. And they tell me in the books that I've read that we had the highest attrition rate of any outfit in any Marines or wherever in the world. In the midst of all of that, Patton was making advances. Well, D-Day. We had D-Day. I was not there at that occasion, but I was there shortly thereafter. I was flying my missions, and Patton was going dashing across Europe with his army and was running low on fuel. They're just going so fast they can't keep enough fuel there. So they said, we'll use the B-24s and some of them as carriers of fuel. And so we call those gas hulls. And those were pretty hairy as well. We didn't get credit for those. Those didn't count as missions. That he had to go over there and let them shoot at you with big guns, and here they're shooting at you with little guns. But anyway, gas hulls. They put fuel tanks in the bomb bays to haul 87 octane. Airplanes used 100 octane back then. 87 octane for the tanks and all the ground vehicles, weapon carriers, tanks, supply vehicles, and so on. So they said, we will take the fuel to France. Now, France had been liberated, sort of. And so we would take our B-24s and they would put 87 octane gasoline in these auxiliary tanks, and we would fly them to liberated Luftwaffe bases. We would land in there, the runways were full of holes, and troops all around, still not liberated, but they're still there and they can shoot at you. And we would fly our plane across at low altitude. They said we want to put as much gas as we can so the guys can't go. So none of the gunners went. We had a pilot, co-pilot, navigator, engineer, and radio operator. 5 guys, the other 5 had to stay home. Well, the bombardier didn't go. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, flight engineer, and radio operator. That's it, that's 5. So we had 5 crew members. And so we would fly in, unload, or they would unload, and we'd fly back. We did that 8 times. And they sort of played that down. It's no big deal. But we lost 3 aircraft in one of those. I witnessed one of those myself, the plane going down. But those are fun times. I had my 21st birthday at Saint Dizier, Germany, France, and I was sleeping on the flight deck. We didn't get there in time to go back, so we had to guard the airplane and leave the next day. They didn't want us to fly that night. But the plane one of the little towns was in Belgium, and the town had just been liberated. And we delivered our gas, and we were on our way back, and there's all these little civilians out there waving their flag and throwing their hats in the air, and they'd been liberated and so on. They were having a grand time. So we said, well, let's give them a thrill. So we started circling the town, wiggling our wings at them and, celebrating with them. Well, one of our other buddies also decided, well, hey, that looks fun. So they joined us too. So we're going counterclockwise around the city square. Of course, a huge circle. But he's on one side of the circle and I'm on the other, counterclockwise. And everything was fine, and all of a sudden we saw a big boom. And some of the guys on the ground had not been liberated. They still had their guns. And while we were circling at low altitude, they picked out the other guy and shot him out of the sky. So it could have been me just as well, but thankfully it wasn't. So those were the gas holes. 35 missions and 8 of those. Now, I've never seen another guy that flew 8. So that's the way it is. We finished our missions. A lot of the guys, when they'd finish their mission, would come roaring over the field and see how close they could get the propellers to the grass and see how low they could cut it, and that kind of thing. A lot of guys lost their lives showing off. And I thought this would be absolutely stupid to do that. One of my missions was to effectively attack the enemy, and number 2, to get my guys back. We're all still intact. I was wounded twice and got the Purple Heart once, but I stopped some flak twice. But I was the only guy that was injured on the crew, and when it came time to celebrate, I went in and landed just like a normal person, and they gathered around and took our picture and so on. We had to wait a few days in order to go home. My navigator left first, and then my crew members and then the co-pilot, bombardier, and I were shipped to a port and put on a cruiser Ile-de-France, which is a French luxury liner. And we got on the thing first. We got there early. The date was the day that Roosevelt died. I remember that very distinctly. When the ship was finally loaded, they were bringing ambulances in with wounded soldiers. These guys were missing arms, missing legs, whatever. They brought them in terrible condition, but they were going home, and we were going home. I looked at them and I thought, my pitiful little wounds are nothing. Those guys had whole pieces missing, and I was so blessed and so very fortunate to still be alive. And I'm wearing a Purple Heart. It was kind of different. And Roosevelt died. Well, it took us a few days to get home. And we got to America, and they said, you got a couple of weeks rest and rehabilitation. And so I went to my hometown. Now, my dad was now deceased. My mama didn't know anything about the preacher's daughter in Tulsa. But we had made clandestine plans to meet. Well, that was the start of a long process. It's lasted for 62 years. 82 years. How many years? I've forgotten now. I've given you so many numbers I've forgotten. I'll be fake news. Now, what I didn't know was that I'm on trial. Cindy was a very devout Christian. I knew nothing. I mean, zero. I didn't know anything. She's falling in love with me, and I'm falling in love with her. And here I am, a non-believer and strict believer that a marriage should be undivided. It should be one. But here she is going along with all this stuff about engagement and marriage and all this kind of thing, and here I am, an unbeliever. I didn't know I was an non-believer. She didn't tell me I was a non-believer. She was very cool about it in the way she handled things. I had no inkling until after we were married 2 years. She told me told me all this stuff. But anyway, she was praying that, that her commitment to the Lord was firm, that she was not going to marry an unbeliever, etc. And so she kept praying for me. I got out of the service. We're going to get married. We're not going to be in the Army. We're not going to fly anymore. We're not going to go to all those extra things. And airlines flying from here to there and away from home all the time. I didn't want that. I didn't have any kind of skills. I could fly a B-24 and Herman had job openings for that. But here I am, a poor risk, not a Christian, no trades, no nothing. We go plugging along here. We buy a house. We buy furniture. In the meantime, I'm commuting to see her every weekend from Ponca City to Tulsa through Indian Territory. 100 miles over, 100 miles back. I'd go over every Sunday and go home every Sunday. And we quartered in between. I said, Cindy, I got to go home. I've got to go to work early in the morning because the farmers are harvesting and they need me. Lie. But anyway, so she saw through right through that. And so I said, I'm going home early tonight. Okay, I said I didn't have a choice out in the living room. Well, before you go, let's pray. So she'd prayed with me before. So we knelt down right there in the parsonage, and she prayed for me, the Lord to give me a safe trip, etc. We got up, I kissed her goodbye, and all. I said, now when you go, you just pray to the Lord. Just talk to him like we're talking right now. Okay. So I got in the car and I started, and they're singing an invitation song in the church. Now we've gone through, we might as well have gone, but anyway, they were singing an invitation, Almost Persuaded or something like that, Now I knew no songs. I had no background or anything else. I was an instrumentalist. I played the horn. And said, you just pray. And I was really feeling guilty about lying to her in the first place and then not going when I said I was going to go. And so, it just wasn't real. I felt pretty guilty, and I drove out of Tulsa, looked in the rear view mirror and saw the skyscrapers disappear. And I got out in Indian Territory where there were very few towns and very few people. So I said, well, she said to try praying. Just talk to the Lord. So I don't know what I said to him. Have no idea. Drove and got halfway through in a little town, Pahuska, Oklahoma, which is right on the road, the only town really. And right outside of it was a little oil town. It was oil country. Grazing and oil was it. And so I started praying, and pretty soon I really got feeling guilty and depressed and despondent, and I just started praying, talking to the Lord out of my heart. And passed through that little town of Oklahoma. And of all things, they processed formaldehyde. That was one of the byproducts of that little refining town. And I was praying, and all of a sudden, Lord, I'll do anything you want me to do. I remember those words. And the joy came to my heart. And I passed through. Now, I didn't know anything about satanic attacks. I learned real quick. Passed through that town. Formaldehyde cleared my head, the devil said. That was nothing happened. That odor just cleared your head and you feel better. And I didn't know it, but I did know it. I rebuked Satan. The greatest lesson I'd ever learned of rebuking. When you become a veteran, you become more observant of the people around you. You can call it profiling if you wish, but you can just spot them. If this is really a veteran, is this really a patriot or a fake? And so it's been one of the great things of having that as a bit of, having been a veteran. And I've really paid very, very little attention to it. After I got out of the service, I was a wartime veteran, I guess, what you would call me, because I wasn't a warrior like you were. I don't know. There's a camaraderie when you been around people or their kin who's been killed or maimed or whatever. There's just something about it. And I've been involved in that since a long time ago. I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about the background of the veterans organizations. The 8th Air Force Historical Society, and then there's one called the 2nd Air Division. I found out about those just almost by accident when Cindy and I went to England later on in the 1980s. And we stayed in a bed and breakfast here in Norwich. And the keeper of the bed and breakfast said, "Have you been to the library?" "What library are you talking about?" "You don't know about the Historical Society library?" "No, I don't know anything about it." "Right up here in the municipal library, there's a room up there dedicated to the guys who flew in World War II. In the 2nd Air, B-24 guys." "Really?" I said, "Well, it's too late to go tonight, but you can go tomorrow." They open up at 10 o'clock in the morning. So we spent the night there, and this guy pointed the way and said, "Well," he says, "it's walking distance." And we stayed within walking distance of the memorial I didn't even know about. And we went up there and started meeting people. The librarian was an American. The research librarian was a Brit, Tony North, who's written a number of books, some in this office here. So we went up there and went in. Lo and behold, here's this library with pictures of B-24s, emblems of our division, pictures and records and diaries and official records and stuff. I was having a ball. I said, "Well, you need to join." "I need to join what?" "Well, there's a 2nd Air Division Association, the 8th Air Force." "Really?" So she gave me an application form and said, "Send it in." So I sent my $10 or whatever and sent my money in. And about a month later, I got 3 2nd Air Division journals, past journals, and so she sent me, the secretary sent me those. And I was reading it and said, having an anniversary in Savannah, 50th anniversary of VE Day. Said limited space, we only have 300 guests, 300 spots, Boy, I got my money out and sent it off right quick and got a note back. I said, "You're in, here are your tickets," and so on. So we booked up for the first reunion that we ever went to. Went there and they had about 21, I think it was, 8th Air Force commanders that were in the reception line. And this blew me away. I mean, they were playing footage of patriotic music and tearjerker kind of stuff and all. And we went to that and went through the line, and the widow of Ira Aker, the guy who formed the 8th Air Force, his widow was there. And I shook her hand and I went through the line crying. These people looked at me kind of, well, and pretty soon they were all crying because it was so very meaningful for me. And we've gone through that with that organization, which is now dead. They were a last man organization. They weren't going to go any further than that. The last man that dies, that's it. And that's the way it was. Until the leadership all died off. So they did away with it. And then later the 8th Air Force Historical Society is another veterans organization. And we had our, I don't know what reunion was, just recently in Dayton. I went up there. But when you go to those, there'd be 1,500 to 2,000 guys. Get the biggest hotel in town, and we'd sit around lying to each other and tell our stories. and I just came from this one in Dayton. There were 4 veterans there. I mentioned Tom Madron. Anyway, I mentioned one of them just a few moments ago. Elmo Maiden. And two others. One of them is totally blind, and the other one has one eye. They come. Their grandchildren accompany them. Our son went with us to drive for us. And everybody had somebody driving for them. Goodness, used to fly airplanes, and now we can't even drive a car. I can drive it, but there's too much trappings to take along to, it's just kind of inconvenient. But it's a great organization, and those people, we still have our little ceremonies and burn candles, not like a Catholic church, but burn candles to commemorate the dead, the living, the British, the guys that support us. Five candles, I've forgotten what they are now, but anyway, they light that little candle, go through that little ceremony, and so forth. But that's my association, still is, with the veterans.
That's great.
I'm still alive. Here I am.
Still kicking.